on now. Can you hear me? No? Hello? 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 Am I on? Am I on? Okay. I'll try not to blast you. It's hard to tell if I'm on from here. Steve? It's on. Hello. Oh. Hello. Welcome back. Welcome back. How's everybody doing? Did you have a good lunch? Everybody have a good lunch and you're rested and ready to go? Well, I'm gonna start because try to keep close to time. A few people will still be coming in, but they're going to miss the announcements, I'm sorry. So you're going to have to share it with them. I have a few announcements to go over before we get started. So the Holiday Inn shuttle is over for the day. So we have made special arrangements for a few rides back to the hotel later today. The first ride will be at 6 p.m. and the second ride at 8:30 p.m. Please meet promptly at the first floor lobby at either 6 or 8:30 for a ride back to the Holiday Inn. Christopher Dixon will arrange, so if you have questions, see Christopher. Okay? Audio-visual order forms are due no later than noon tomorrow on Monday. If you turn your form in by tomorrow morning, your order will be ready for pickup on the first floor lobby between 1 and 3 on Tuesday. So they are amazing. In addition to your program schedule, tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. in the auditorium, we'll share information about the online School of Theosophy and the new TSA website. You're not going to want to miss that, okay? If you have purchased numerous books and would like help in shipping them home, if they're more than you can carry, okay, we'll have some backpacks for you. No. You can get them shipped home. This can be arranged through TPH, the bookshop building. Take your items to TPH when you have free time on Monday or Tuesday and ask for Diana, Pat, or Angel, and they'll help you arrange shipping, okay? Buy lots of books. Finally, if you wish to share a ride back to the airport with someone, please see Beverly Porzelt as soon as possible. Beverly will try to connect you with someone who can share the cost of the ride, okay? All right. Everybody get that? Any questions? Okay. Yes. Yes. Oh, Beverly, are you here? Oh, back here. Stand up. Yeah, okay. Yes.
Will she be coordinating rides for both conferences?
Uh,
Rides for the second conference, ITC conference back as well? Okay.
Yeah, okay. All right, that's the housekeeping. Now for the fun part, okay? It is my delight and pleasure to introduce Maria. I've known Maria for, I think, maybe 20 years. And when I first started going to Crotona more regularly, I enrolled in a program, the Partners of Theosophy, and Maria was one of my mentors, and she's a wonderful teacher and friend. So Maria Parisen joined the Theosophical Society in 1969. Talk about anniversaries, right? 50 years ago. Through the Detroit Lodge, in which she was active for over 30 years. During that time, she served on the board of directors of the Theosophical Society in America and the Theosophical Order of Service, and presented programs internationally for the TS. She also compiled the Society's quest anthology, Angels and Mortals, Their Co-Creative Power. In 2003, Maria moved with her husband to the Crotona Institute of Theosophy in Ojai, California, where she serves on the Institute's board of directors and also directs the Crotona School. As an RN with a master's degree in nursing science, Maria worked in both critical and rehabilitation care centers. Her interests span the range of human consciousness, our unity with nature, and our individual and collective need for wholeness and healing. After her husband's passing in 2016, Maria has remained in Crotona at the mercy of 2 cats and a dog, grateful for the love and inspiration of their 2 sons, and her extended family. She's going to be talking to us today on Call and Covenant, our undivided relations with all life. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. Thank you all for being here. It's a great privilege and pleasure to share a few ideas with you all. And what I've decided to do is, I've got a bit of an echo. What I'd like to do is to focus on some specific passages from the Secret Doctrine, especially for those of you who may be new to the text. Many of them are drawn from the summary of the first volume, and then there is also a little bit from The Voice of the Silence and a couple of other commentaries by some more of our contemporaries on the teaching itself and what it may mean for us and how we may assimilate it into our lives. There's a lot been written, and what I want to relate it to as we go along with our own theosophical seal. There's a lot been written on the symbols in this seal. We have a little pamphlet TSA has put out. There's material on the TS Wiki and other places. And in the Secret Doctrine, Madame Blavatsky goes into great detail on many of these symbols and others. And what was suggested there is that the language of these symbols are a kind of doorway or a window into something deeper and beyond. And the Secret Doctrine was intended to begin with, as Madame Blavatsky said, was to lead toward the truth. She never considered herself someone who was bringing a revelation and so forth. And we will see that in some of her comments. But the seal, for me, has been something very special, not to go into in a scholarly manner, but because it touches something deeper in me that, not deeper than the scholarly, but deeper than even the surface study, that seems to nourish something of what we might call the soul, the spiritual self, that's looking for simplicity, looking for direction, and looking for a way to express its wholeness in our everyday life. So here in the seal we have a symbol that expresses something of our origins, our present situation as a humanity and as individuals, and something of our destiny. And this is what the Secret Doctrine was intended to make available to those who were eager and persistent enough to engage with this teaching. So this was Madame Blavatsky's dedication. This work I dedicate to all true theosophists in every country and of every race, for they called it forth, and for them it was recorded. So, for Madame Blavatsky and her teachers, the possibility of a universal brotherhood of humanity, a fully united humanity, was already in the works. The potential was already being activated. And around the world, there were already those who were drawn to the theosophical way of life, not necessarily to a specific doctrine, but to a life that could be lived in service not only to the highest within oneself, but a life that was dedicated in some mysterious way to the well-being of all life, all forms of life. And I think that even though we were not in incarnation at that time, we were a part of the calling. if we are all of one life, visible and invisible, incarnated or at rest on the other side, we have a part in bringing about whatever happens here in this world. And so we called the Secret Doctrine forth, and for us it was recorded. The mystery of this recording is enormous. The abilities of Madame Blavatsky were strange for us. The way she worked was strange, looking at forms in the astral world and in the etheric field. And but she didn't do it alone. It was an enormous effort for her, as she was not well, and the physical body required enormous care. So she was given shelter by theosophists around her. She was given a place to live. All of her physical needs were attended to as much as possible. So there were a whole group of individuals around her, many women and men as well, who actually participated in her care and helped her to be strong. So this was very much a bringing forth of something by a kind. It was a midwifing of a great work by a number of different skilled hands skilled in different ways. But she was the center of it. And of course, behind it all was the masters who were helping her as much as they could under the circumstances, the karmic circumstances under which she was working, and those were great. There were many who were assaulting her with, especially, and she was especially sensitive to the inner worlds, all of this negative energy, all of the prejudice, all of the skepticism, all of the criticism was coming her way. But I believe that the team around her, although she didn't form it, except she did put some pressure on some to come and help her from time to time. And it was difficult to say no to Helena Blavatsky. They helped to shield her, just as we help to shield each other every day in our everyday lives. All of this work goes on behind the scenes and is part of our inner life. So this was a part of a number of talks that she gave to the American Convention between 1888 and 1891. Many who have never heard of the society are theosophists without knowing it themselves. For the essence of theosophy is the perfect harmonizing of the divine with the human in man. Kindness, absence of every ill feeling or selfishness, charity, goodwill to all beings, and perfect justice to others as to oneself are its chief features. So this is in her view, the essence of theosophy. In our theosophical worldview now, we add devotion to truth and also commitment to a life of active altruism. This is a part of the literature that goes out through our international center, and here, of course, as well. But look at this. Look at the requirements. We, of course, have not perfected these latent powers, but they are budding within us. In The Voice of the Silence, which is her mystical work, which came out after The Secret Doctrine, another translation from some of the works that were central to the writing of The Secret Doctrine, she speaks of this, or translates the work, where the soul is referred to as our budding soul, a soul that now is only a half-open flower, a half-open rose. Rose often is the symbolism used. So we have to be aware of the fact that we're only about halfway through our evolution, the unfolding of all of the dimensions of our being, and realize that this is the direction we're moving into, and these behaviors, these qualities within us are the ones that must and inevitably underlie the refinement of the physical body, the quieting and steadying of the emotions, and the stimulation of our powers of thought, imagination, visioning, and intuition. So this is the life that needs to be lived in relationship. All the rest of it follows. So this is the aim of the Secret Doctrine, as stated by her in the first volume. The aim of this work may thus be stated to show that nature is not a fortuitous concurrence of atoms, to assign to man his rightful place in the scheme of the universe, to rescue from degradation the archaic truths which are the basis of all religions, and to uncover, to some extent, the fundamental unity from which they all spring. And finally, the aim is to show that the occult side of nature has never been approached by the science of modern civilization. So here we have essentially the objects of the Theosophical Society. But what she is saying is that there is, in the doctrine, the central idea or concept that nature is orderly, purposeful, through and through, that the human being sits right at a critical point in the evolution of all forms of life, not just the evolution or transformation of humanity. Also, to rescue from superstition, from misunderstanding, from misuse, the truths which are the basis of all religions. And we do this in our lodges as best we can. We try to look for the principles and practices that are central to various faiths and philosophies. We're interested in the diversity, in the details, of course, but the unity is where the life pours through and makes that diversity come alive. Uncovering the fundamental unity from which they spring, and to show that the occult side of nature has never been approached by modern science. Now we know that the occult, the hidden side of nature, can only be approached by one whose inner eyes, the eyes and ears of the soul, have been opened. That is, the inner side of nature can only be approached and those forces assimilated into our own being if our consciousness has been purified and sensitized and raised to an enormous degree. So it requires the science of today, something much more than we see now in our scientific community. We all know the limits of that. We're living with it. The Secret Doctrine, she affirms, is the accumulated wisdom of the ages. But such is the mysterious power of occult symbolism that the facts which have actually occupied countless generations of initiated seers and prophets to marshal, set down, and explain in the bewildering series of evolutionary progress. All these are recorded on a few pages of geometrical signs and glyphs. So an assembly of symbols, as we have in our Theosophical Seal, holds an enormous number of secrets. And it's, to me, enormously inspiring to realize that countless, she will say in the next passage, thousands of generations of seers, initiated seers and prophets, have worked to unlock the symbols we have in such a simple way as the emblem of our organization and of our inner life. The flashing gaze of those seers has penetrated into the very kernel of matter and recorded the soul of things there. An uninterrupted record covering thousands of generations of seers whose respective experiences were made to test and verify the traditions, passed on orally from one early race to another, of the teachings of higher and exalted beings who watched over the childhood of humanity. This is, for me, a kind of revelation. What it suggests is that humanity, even in its infancy, before its descent into physical incarnation and beyond, has always been attended by higher beings, those who are beyond us in evolution, and perhaps are not embodied in a physical presence. What they did was help to catalyze, to energize, to help make possible a potential organization of a higher self, a consciously operating higher self of individuality in the human race, in human beings themselves. We are not self-conscious because of our own efforts. Nature could bring us only so far, and then we needed the help of those beyond. So a kind of spark was infused in us, the potential for full self-consciousness. And they did that by blending their consciousness with our own. That blend still exists today. It's a wonder. It's a refuge. It's an inspiration to know that we have within us the life and light and the love of beings who have a much higher view of what needs to be done than we do here. The personal self has no way of understanding the depth of our relation with these beings. Only as we energize the life of the soul within us and the spiritual soul beyond that, all a part of our individuality, will we realize how deeply they have sacrificed their lives for us in this blending, and how always a covenant has existed between our inner lives and theirs. Think also, just for a moment, of the life of these generations of seers and prophets. They lived in times, or incarnated in times, that are far different from ours now. We don't know what conditions were on the earth at that time, what cultures they belonged to necessarily. But they were placed, as are we, in places where the need was great and where they had circumstances karmically allowed for them to do the inner work that was needed to be done. And they did this because they had developed not only a physical presence, but also the wideness of heart and mind and the spiritual perception to do the work that was needed. That was the visioning that was needed to bring forth this record through the ages. It's easy to understand, in a way, why this research has needed to be done all along the way within our evolving humanity. Because we can see how the religious traditions, even today, have been diluted, have been watered down, have been misused. Someone, through the ages, perhaps through the aeons, has had to be sure that there was a thread, a kind of golden thread, that was not lost from the teachings of the ones who originally assisted humanity in its descent into matter. So, the fundamental law in this wisdom tradition, in the occult science, the central point from which all emerged, around and toward which all gravitates, and upon which is hung the philosophy of all the rest, is the one homogeneous divine substance principle, the one radical cause. It is the omnipresent reality, impersonal, because it contains all and everything. Its impersonality is the fundamental conception of the system. It is latent in every atom of the universe and is the universe itself. The image, of course, in the corner is the Om. It arises from this impersonal background. But the important thing here, when we come upon a phrase like homogeneous divine substance principle, we go, oh my, what is this? How can I relate to something like this? But what it suggests is that behind everything we see, behind everything even in the invisible worlds that we will encounter in future, there is this undivided, we could call it a matrix, we could call it a limitless mind. It is that state in which spirit and matter are profoundly in communion, profoundly at one with each other. It's a kind of sacred marriage. We could say the same of consciousness and matter. Nothing is moving. This polarity is fused, as it were, but it's full of potential. When that plane is, or something similar, is accessed in mystic visions, that place appears like a shoreless sea. It's also been described as completely empty or void. At the same time, simultaneously, it is a plenum. It's full. So that it holds within it the potential of everything that is to come. And its expression, when it begins to manifest, is a trinity, a polarity that turns into or manifests as a trinity, which we see very simply in our symbol of the Om. The Om is a trinity, but sometimes pronounced as O-M, Om. But it is the word, the sound, the primal energy or force or will that begins to bring everything into manifestation. And it is sounding even now in you and me. It is there. Again and again, it's suggested that not necessarily that we chant the Om, although it's a part of a spiritual practice for those who can accept the responsibility of that form of prayer. But we are told again and again to seek out the song within us, the song within our deepest self, the point within ourselves where everything seems to come forth. That sound is the sound of the Spirit in incarnation within each one of us. You know, sacred music, sacred hymns, sacred sounds have always been a way that we steady ourselves when things are going well, when things are not. There's something about sound and resonance within us that we can reach, but mainly when we're quiet. Because the capacities that we're bringing forth now, that is, intuitive capacities, can only come through and lighten this mind and heart when there is a stillness. So this is a sound, a resonance that is sounding within all things, and one in which we can attune ourselves to at any time. All we need to do is turn our attention to it in simplicity and in love. The one fundamental law in occult science is this radical unity of the ultimate essence of each constituent part of compounds in nature. From star to mineral atom, from the highest Dhyani Chohan, archangel, to the smallest infusoria, in the fullest sense of the term, and whether applied to the spiritual, intellectual, or physical worlds. So we have, even represented by the Om, this radical essence that is within each one of us, and makes it possible then for us to find healing and health and integration at the physical level, the emotional level, stillness and quietness and harmony in the mind, and all of those made ready for, through this, the presence of this essence, a full immersion in the life of the Supreme Spirit. So even when we think about healing and health, the presence of this essence makes the return to wholeness possible. If it were not there, we would just be disconnected or randomly connected, organs and cells and tissues. But this essence means that everything is in harmony within us and always tending toward wholeness and healing, if we allow it to happen. This is a passage that I have always been drawn to. Everything in the universe throughout its kingdoms is conscious, endowed with a consciousness of its own kind and its own plane of perception. We must remember that because we do not perceive any signs which we can recognize of consciousness, say in stones, we have no right to say that no consciousness exists there. There is no such thing as either dead or blind matter, as there is no blind or unconscious law. The latter, this law, which is intelligence in nature, the latter never stops at surface appearances, and for it, the noumenal essences have more reality than their objective counterparts. One of the important things, all of these can be unpacked. And they're meant to be dwelled on and pondered on and put on under your pillow at night so that you can dream about what they may mean. We're intended to immerse ourselves in these passages in the Secret Doctrine that may call to us and see what they hold for us. It's been said that anything will give up its secrets if you love it enough. Isn't that true? It's true. Then you can be trusted because information can be shared with one who is a lover of nature, a lover of humanity as a whole, and a lover for particulars. So one of the things that this points to is that it's really hard to tell at the physical level what the heck is going on. I mean, there's this constant change. It seems to be moving in one direction, but we seem to backslide a lot, not only individually, but as a humanity as a whole. What is happening? How can karma be involved in this and that? Well, much of karmic workings is involved with these noumenal essences, invisible forces and so forth that are connecting all of us, and connecting us as a planet, and not just as a nation, or a family, or an organization. So the Theosophical Society, is really immersed in all of these invisible forces, some of which are moving us forward, and some of us would like us to fall apart. That is the nature of this evolutionary cycle and process. Another important passage. The universe is worked and guided from within outwards. As above, so it is below, as in heaven, on earth. The micro and man, the microcosm and miniature copy of the macrocosm, is the living witness to this universal law and its mode of action. And here we have just a suggestion that this passage may be related to many things, many symbols, but it may be related to the whirling cross, which Mitch mentioned a little bit about in his talk last evening, the swastika. A stationary cross suggests that a system, an individual, is in repose. But once that cross begins to move, begins to whirl and spin, then things begin to move all around it. And in this case, it is the carrier of the Om, the carrier of the will and the song, the word of the Supreme Spirit. It is the energy that begins to get things moving for a cosmos, a galaxy, a planet, a solar system to begin to emerge and continue its evolution. Everything that is about that system in latency that needs to be brought forward will be energized through the symbol of this cross. It is bounded already because the system is a particular one that's coming into being for a particular purpose. Now we know that the spin can either be clockwise or counterclockwise, and there's also radiating from that center in every direction that spin. So it's not just the four-armed cross, but it could be millions of energetic lines coming from that center and then converging again on the center. An oscillation so quick that it is unimaginable. When the cross is spinning in a clockwise direction, it's suggested that it is renewing, regenerating, rebuilding. When it's spinning in a counterclockwise direction, there's something else going on. There's a releasing, a disintegration, in order that something new can be built. So neither of these spins is positive or negative in the general sense. They have to do with the movement of forces in nature and what's happening in a particular situation. And we have to be able to sense what direction things are moving in whatever situation we're having to deal with. But we know, and she has suggested when she's talking about the human being being the living witness, is that everything that happens in our outer world happens as a result of our thoughts and feelings. These precede action all of the time. And when we become increasingly aware of that movement, it becomes very, very interesting. We begin to catch motive, begin to catch hidden influences and so forth. We begin to be able to identify whether a thought is coming in from somewhere else or whether it's being generated from within myself. All of this becomes very, very interesting. The adepts, when they're talking about their own work and world, they say we live in a world of force and motion. So they're constantly working with their disciples in the identification of the movement of energy and force, physical and subtle. And all of this is done from a peaceful place where the mind is absolutely not only still, but focused in whatever it is that's being explored and whatever results are desired. The whole cosmos is guided, controlled, and animated by an almost endless series of hierarchies of sentient beings, each with a mission to perform, and who, whether we give them one name or another and call them Dhyani Chohans, lords of meditation, or angels, are messengers in the sense only that they are the agents of karmic and cosmic laws. They vary infinitely in their respective degrees of consciousness and intelligence. So we have also a symbol here of the snake swallowing its tail, It is the receptacle, in a way, of the symbols above it in our emblem, our seal, the Om, the whirling cross, and then the boundary of our system, coming into being in a timely way, because the serpent represents a wisdom circle, a cycle that is intended to happen in a particular way and time. So it is, our system is bounded by something that has come into being from latency and wishes to continue its own growth and development. And that's true for our Earth as it is for each one of us. As our consciousness expands, we will discover that there are many other inhabitants in the inner worlds, in the invisible worlds, and we're in connection and either cooperation or battle with them at all times. This is a very interesting discovery for us. It makes us realize how important relations are, and that if we enter or begin to expand our visionary faculties with goodwill and intending to make them available for the good of all, it makes things very much easier. So this is Madame Blavatsky's emphasis that the generations of seers have suggested that the sentient beings in the inner worlds, the ones that they work with especially, the ones who are do not have physical bodies as we do. These are not the souls of the departed, for example. These are individuals or hierarchies that belong to the Devic evolutionary scheme, which complements in some way our own. We're all of one piece, but they have a different work to do. These are conscious of no such distinct separateness as we have a sense of that as we have on Earth. Individuality is the characteristic of their respective hierarchies, and the nearer they are to the region of homogeneity and the one divine, the pure and less accentuated is that individuality in the hierarchy. We can sense this in our own meditations. When the sense of the physical body, when we're in prayer or meditation, and we're focused so deeply that the sense of our own form disappears, then we enter a realm of universal thought and feeling that is much more expansive, much more loving, much more compelling than when we are focused here through the five senses. So, as the masters in their letters suggest, that the only spirits they work with are what they call the highest planetary spirits, those who have to do with the whole of the evolution of Earth. And they suggest that all kingdoms have their guardians, the animal kingdom as well as our own, those who have gone beyond us in evolution and remain on Earth to assist us and all other forms of life. These are the beings they go to in their cooperative efforts. That is a brotherhood that we know very little about, but it is, for me, a very inspiring concept and reality to imagine. The whole order of nature evinces a progressive march toward a higher life. There is design in the action of the seemingly blindest forces. This is something that we need to focus on just briefly. Is one of the things that that happens as we move along in our own unfolding, when we begin to expand our own consciousness, is that we begin to come into a bit of conflict with the lower Devic kingdom. Those that activate the instinctive patterns of the lower kingdoms. And also, they activate our, I could probably say, less healthy and helpful thoughts and emotions. They are the ones, the Devic kingdom is the one that fills our thoughts and feelings with vitality in a completely impersonal way. That's just what they do. The inner fields of the human being are composed of the essences, must be composed of the essences of these elemental kingdoms. Those kingdoms, which is a help for us in some way, their path is the path of forthgoing. It's becoming increasingly physical. That's why they help us to make things manifest. They help to bring our thoughts and feelings alive. That can work either to the detriment of others and ourselves or not. But our thoughts are living creatures, living beings in the inner world, and if we continue to energize them, we draw in Devic element or essence of the same type, of the charge that we have given to those thoughts. So when we begin to release those thoughts, release ourselves from the prison of our somewhat instinctual behaviors and conditionings, we're met with a lot of resistance within us. And part of it is because of the unconscious presence of this Devic element. It's because we need to understand more and more of ourselves that we begin this path to begin with, so that we can take charge of our own lives and release any unhealthy relationship we have with the lower angelic kingdoms. We can still use that elemental essence in a healthy way, but we don't need to be guided or controlled by a kingdom that is, in effect, moving in an opposite direction than we. Their inclination is always diversity, strong stimulation, separation. Ours is to enfold that separation into something whole and beautiful. The interlaced triangles suggest that the powers of heaven are within us. This is from HPB's collected writings. The nature of the intelligences which guide the world force is blended with our own. And could we realize this and forget our outer selves, the very winds would be our instruments. The human mind, in fact, the interlaced triangles, we can study the human body, the human soul, the human spirit, in the light of these interlaced triangles, every one, because each one of these dimensions of our being, body, soul, and spirit, has need of the balancing of the forces of heaven and the forces of earth. Both are needed in our everyday life. Both are essential. We just need to take our place in the center of these triangles and decide consciously in what direction every moment is going to involve. The winds here do not necessarily, for me, mean physical winds. It doesn't mean we're going to control the weather. That may be possible in future, who knows? But we may find easier ways to do it than with the mind. There's a place for technology. There's a lot of things that can be done more with less energy by technology than with applying the so-called psychic powers of the mind. So we need to be sensitive to the fact that when these words are used like winds, they may also apply to the forces of the inner worlds, which right now are blowing us in this direction or another. This is one of my favorite passages in the Voice of the Silence. And I need to give a little context. The first fragment of the Voice of the Silence is suggesting to the disciple that there needs to be a certain stability in oneself, and that's done by quieting the lower self and focusing the attention inward and even beyond the world of thought. There is a point at which enlightenment is very tempting, and there is a tendency then to stray and perhaps lose the path or use the insights that one has gained in an improper way. So, the teacher says, as a reminder, behold the hosts of souls. Watch how they hover over the stormy sea of human life, and how exhausted, bleeding, broken-winged, they drop one after another on the swelling waves. Tossed by fierce winds, chased by the gale, they drift into the eddies and disappear within the first great vortex. It's been suggested that this passage applies to those who are nearing reincarnation again, that in the inner worlds they have very little choice. The winds of karma are blowing them into a situation that is not particularly one that they would choose themselves. For me, this perfectly describes how most of us are living today. There really is no one here who has not experienced on the path exhaustion, an absolute loss of vitality that may have nothing to do with physical illness. Broken winged suggests that we have lost the ability to fly freely through life. Have you ever felt grounded, or as though you were walking through thick mud? The Voice of the Silence has amazing imagery to depict the kind of life that we're leading now, to draw attention of the disciple to the fact that a little bit of enlightenment does not free you from the extent of your conditioning. Close fast thy senses, says the Voice, against the great dire heresy of separateness that weans thee from the rest. So then the suggestion of the Voice is to let thy heaven-born, the spiritual soul, merged in the sea of Maya, break from the universal parent, the universal soul, but let the fiery power retire into the innermost chamber, the chamber of the heart, and the abode of the world's mother. Then from the heart that power will rise into the sixth, the place between thine eyes, when it becomes the breath of the one soul, the voice that filleth all, thy Master's voice. Then thou canst become a walker of the sky, who treads the winds above the waves, whose step touches not the waters. So here we have the suggestion, strongly made by the Voice of the Silence, that there comes a time when there is the need to move one's consciousness deliberately into the heart. Madame Blavatsky says the physical heart is the supreme organ, the most spiritual organ in the physical body. She's talking here about the innermost heart, the point within the circle, the point within the interlaced triangles, the innermost self of ourselves, a place of peace, a place of harmony. We know that place. All we need to do is to be brave enough to slow down and begin to access that space within us. This is the chamber of the heart as the innermost self, the abode of the world's mother. Now, This passage also has been related to the fiery power of Kundalini, which is an etheric power said to be lodged around the region of the sacrum, and it begins to rise at a certain time in our development and begins to energize the etheric body of the human being. It tends to open certain latent powers. But the voice of the silence suggests that that power should rise only when the disciple has begun to breathe with all of life, to understand from the heart how to engage other forms of life in a productive way, and to work for the benefit of a mutual relationship. So it's only then in the heart of compassion, the heart of mercy, the heart of understanding, the heart of empathy, the heart of sympathy. It's only there, as we heard early on, is the essence of theosophy: charity, goodwill toward others, an earnest search for truth, a commitment to a life of active altruism. That's where the intuition must rest. And then when a certain degree of development happens, then that power can rise. And our mind will be more fully opened. And the heart will open from the soul will open just like a flower, from the state of being a bud to being a fully opened flower. So these images can be looked at in very many different ways, but they're meant for us now. And they're to caution us. The whole first fragment of the voice of the silence is to caution the disciple against the premature development of psychic powers. To have so much, to have the understanding that's needed so that one can move forward safely, not doing harm to oneself or others. Psychic powers will come in their own way and time, but love must bring them about, and love must guide the force of Kundalini when it begins to rise. Its fire can burn and destroy as well as warm. This is very simple, also from the voice of the silence. Our time is running low, so I want to just focus on the idea of soul wisdom and the I and the heart doctrine. It seems pretty clear, doesn't it, that the heart doctrine has something to do with taking the information we have gained, the visions we have experienced, all of that into relationship. If those experiences don't build relationship, if they don't encourage inclusion, brotherhood, mutual understanding, reverence and respect for the holy ones or for one's elders, if it doesn't encourage all of that, then it just is something that is impressive intellectually, but has no depth. The heart doctrine is the one, actually, it is in the voice of the silence, it is the life of the bodhisattva, one who is beginning with every small effort to sacrifice the separated life for one that is being lived for something greater and wider and more noble. It's not that the I doctrine is evil. It's needed for some individuals who are enlightened and destined to move into nirvana or rest. But for us in the Theosophical Society, another ideal is held before us. The possibility of maybe even delaying that rest in order to be available to other forms of life. So this is another, and I think we'll move beyond this. This suggests again that we can work, we're enjoined actually to help nature and work on with her. And that all of nature, there's a beautiful ending to the voice of the silence, where an adept achieves full enlightenment and all of nature rejoices. Especially because that one, that fully enlightened one, has chosen to remain, to lift the rest of us as much as can be done. So nature opens wide before one who comes before her in love. The treasures that she holds within us, within her heart, it is said that she shows only to the eye of spirit. What she reveals to us, especially, is our own human nature. When we begin to work with her in full consciousness, doing our very best, we access energies and life within ourselves, vitality, that we have not imagined before. And we see it also in each other. And we begin to encourage that in each other and in all forms of life. This is, we're near our closing. This is Sri Madhava Ashish, Man, Son of Man, a beautiful commentary, one of two on the Secret Doctrine, that the true teaching raises echoes in the depths of ourselves, our beings. We recognize them because they sound the notes of a truly human aspiration. It's in ourselves we look for certainty, not to outside teachers necessarily. We're aware of the teaching coming from a teacher and each other, but within the heart is where that certainty begins to arise. We speak of the heart and not of the mind, for love is the goal and love is the guide. Though clear reason may guard our feet from the many pitfalls of the path, the certainty we seek is the certainty of love. That is the certainty that gives us courage to break the bonds of our imprisonment. Madame Blavatsky's teacher, and she shares this in her esoteric instructions, he gave her a list of a series of qualities that need to be gained. They're simply called the golden stairs, and they're there for anyone to see. They begin with a series of ways to purify and sensitize and lift the lower consciousness. And then there's a small series of what we must do in relationship with a teacher. And the last three of the golden stairs have to do with courage. Courage and the ability to stand up for each other. The last one of all is the one I wanted to mention, and that is a constant eye to the ideal of human progression and perfection, which the secret science depicts. That, the last step, is the final step toward the final and perhaps even the beginning, because these steps, we go up and down all the time. But it's called the stairs to the temple of the wisdom. So this is Radha Bernier, past president of our International Society. Theosophical life is thus a natural growth into altruism. Wisdom cannot be obtained by someone who does not have the love of humanity, nay, all of life, at heart. Love cannot come about in a mind which sees only diversity. Only when the mind has glimpses of unity does it begin to care. Then it cannot rest until it finds the way out of sorrow. Here begins the work of acquiring self-knowledge. It is vastly different from seeking relief from personal difficulties. So, I forgot to say that in in the golden stairs, and some of us recite this on a kind of regular basis together, the first part of it, the words of the Master are never spoken for some reason. And what he said was, "Behold the truth before you." So, behold the truth before this symbol of our Theosophical Society. Dwell on these symbols because they suggest that behind the symbols, even in the center, there is this radiance arising from a vast, limitless, empty and full matrix. The radiance is radiating right from the center of this assembly, even though it's no longer seen. In the foreground is our own life. Always connected with the Om and the spin of the whirling cross that is universal, but finding its way into our system. Bounded by the serpent of wisdom, the wisdom cycles in which we're immersed, challenged by the interlaced triangles, the forces moving us heavenward and also helping us to stay grounded here, for good or not. And then the enlightened individual at the center. The perfection not of a physical body or this or that appearance, but the perfection of love. The perfection of our ability to see directly into the truth of things. The perfection of our ability to bring out the best in each other and the best in other kingdoms as well. There is no religion higher than truth. And we're immersed in it, we're informed by it, we're inspired by it. And we can discover it in every moment of our lives and recognize the calling and the covenant in stillness and in the midst of apparent chaos. It can be done. Thank you. I'm not sure about questions, but what I feel is though I would rather have an exchange than necessarily questions. If I would appreciate commentary on your understanding of the symbol and what it has meant for you in your life. What you understand of one symbol or another of this assembly, what it means for the society, as well as what it might have meant for you. Richard.
Hope you can hear me. Yes, the serpent of wisdom. This is a symbol, again, I think that especially has the yin and yang to it. Serpent is supposed to be very wise, and yet the serpent is very dangerous and very, you got to be very careful. So I'm just curious why, specifically, the serpent is used in this context.
Yes.
I believe it's in the second volume of the Secret Doctrine. Chapter 25 is included, and Helen begins by saying she's completed. She doesn't say, she says, before we quit, there's one subject that we have to talk about, and it has to do with the Hebdomad. I won't go into detail on that, but it's in that section that she makes reference to the, if I remember correctly, the universal, the most ancient understanding of many, many, many different world religions had to do with the serpent being involved in something important with our design and creation. Okay, and so that may be another aspect to the Ouroboros that we see depicted.
The serpent of wisdom in Genesis, the Bible, is the one who tempted Eve. And Eve said that God told her not to eat from the prohibited fruit. However, the tempter, the serpent of wisdom, told her that no, when you eat from this fruit, your eyes will be open and you shall be as God. That's for me is a promise that human beings is God in the make. Because the Bible says very clearly, you shall be as God. That means they were actually the evolutionary level of their consciousness to become gods. That's my interpretation.
This kind of flows with Albert's comment / whatever. What someone told me this past spring that I think it's from somewhere in the Native America, one of the tribes, but like a snake, it needs to shed its skin, and in order to do that, it rubs itself on the grass and finds some pebbles, and those aren't hard enough. So sometimes it takes a sharp rock, and it'll rub its body on that, and eventually that skin will come off, which kind of goes with the idea of evolution and what we're becoming. And it's also very circular, the symbol, and I think of rotation, and with rotations come revolutions, bring evolution. And so, to me, I always saw evolution in there. And I'm not very familiar with symbols or this symbol in particular, but in the last couple weeks, I saw it, and I was thinking about the center and where our sphere of influence is, and that's what you said was kind of what was resonating with me when I look at it. So the Ankh in the middle, though, being the ideal human, I really like it. Yeah, I appreciate you.
Well, I'm not sure if I understood the question, but I think you said something about what was our personal relationship with the symbol. Was that part of the question?
It's possible. Yes.
I just wanted to say, in terms of the personal relationship with the symbol, one thing I really love about the symbol is this bright expanse, which seems like the sun. And everywhere, it's like the sun seems like maybe it was really the first thing we worshipped. If you when you start yoga, you start Om Mitraya Namaha, and so you've got the Om there. And Mitra, if you look at Christ, Christ is really emulated from this presence of the sun, Mitra, because they had the same characteristics. And so this is just a very primal thing, starting at the essence, which to me is the sun. That must have been the first thing that we just were in awe about. And so the whole background of the symbol is the sun. And then if you look at the symbol of the Om symbol is the sound of creation. We've got the light, and then we've got the sound. And then I was very captivated, because I guess I just didn't really realize that the swastika was the movement. So we've got the light, we've got the sound, we've got the movement. So it's the progression of the incarnation, of matter. And so it's a very, just powerful symbol.
Thank you.
I find this image very evocative. It has a lot of, it's pregnant with a lot of symbolism that is married in multiple faith-based traditions. The Ankh is the symbol of the unity between the womb and the phallus of eternal life, embedded within the Heros Gamos, with you have the spirit and matter in marriage. But it's also the yin and yang because of the colors. You have the positive and negative, and you also have the seal of Solomon, and you have the Star of David, and you have the Ouroboros, and like she said, light and sound and motion. And the spinning cross is also a 2D kind of representation of a third dimensional, like toroid, which is something that exists around our hearts and around the planet and around the sun through our galaxy and then through the super galaxy. And so when I see this, I feel like it's evoking that deep wisdom latent within all of humankind to become apotheosis and be in unity with that supreme consciousness and kind of awaken our own potential within that, with what that represents.
Very good.
Oh, all right, finally. To me, the emblem is an object of meditation, and you can call it a seed meditation. And each one of those symbols has a particular meaning for the development of systems, of universes, and of man. And you can use it as what is known as a yantra, and eventually get so far in the meditative process that you can drop that and become one with any one of those particular symbols or with all of them. It can lead you to the highest extent possible for humanity.
I think we're about, do we have one more? All right, thank you.
Just the upward and downward triangles, how intimately interlaced they are. And the whole symbol is just incredibly dynamic, that's what we've been saying, and as is Theosophy. And the upward is like the aspiration, seeking, and the path, and so forth. And the downward is the practical application, and try to put these ideas into practice. But they're just so intimately interlaced. And so that would be true for the society as well. It would be aspiration as well as application.
Absolutely. Now we have one last one, please.
Oh, okay. First of all, this has been amazing. I mean, mind-blowing, heart-blowing. I mean, but without, I just want to add one more thing, because you spoke of, was it within the convocation? Covenant. That is, that's because covenant, the reason why, covenant with undivided self. The reason why I thought of mentioning that is we are so polarized. What's the root of all this polarization and tribes and divisions? The covenant, as far as there is, is that the covenant is between the lower self and the higher self. The higher self is or the individual is the upward tending triangle, and the lower self is the personality. You see, we tend to look at we confuse individuality and personality. Individuality is connected with our higher self, which is consciousness of unity of all things, which there you have. So our task, and each one, so our task is to aspire towards that unity.
which means we have to have consciousness, brotherhood. That's what it means, expand. I love the way you put it. Individuality in this sense is universalization of our love, of truth, of brotherhood.
Perfect.
And also what it means to be an individual.
That's perfect. That's a good place to start. Thank you very much.
One more round of applause for Maria, please.
Oh, no, thank you. Now I think we have David Bruce. David?
3:45.
3:45. It's 3:25 now.
That's, with the camera. He's Daya's husband, Kujansu. Yeah.
Are you hearing anything?
Chris is turning it down in the back.
Okay.
Hold on. Should we go?
I've never known that to work. Ever. That's probably because I had a man behind me, huh? I know. It is my honor to introduce our next speaker. His talk is going to be on serving a higher purpose, and I think he is eminently suited to the subject. I want you to understand that you can buy multiple copies of his books because you can have them shipped to any location you want. So with that, I'll start the formal introduction. Our speaker, David Bruce, is of course our National Secretary. He is a third-generational theosophist. Not only that, I understand that other relatives in his family were also theosophists. So he has DNA in his blood, theosophical DNA. He comes by it naturally, not that we all don't. But he joined the society in 1985. He's a past director of education at the Theosophical Society here at Alcott. He is currently the TSA National Secretary, who does so much for the branches and study centers. And I know this from personal experience. He manages the TSA National Lodge. And if you heard some of the details about this thing this morning when the departments gave their reports, you would understand what an incredible job that he is doing for us. He founded and oversees the Prisoner Correspondence Program, of which I am a mentor. I have 3 prisoners that correspond with me, and the other mentors have either 2 or 3 as well. So he reviews those requests for prisoners who want to join some of the study groups or be involved in this correspondence program. So there's a lot going on there in addition to all the other work that he does. In addition to that, I don't know if you've noticed, but on the Theosophical Society website, he writes short, thought-provoking monthly essays. The list that I saw goes back to 2009. He writes 1 essay a month, if my understanding is correct there. And they're open for you to read at any time you want. What is particularly interesting and probably relates to this book significantly is the fact that in those short essays, he has 12 prologues and 48 reflections on the voice of the silence. And these can be and have been tremendous help for all of those who wish to study the voice of the silence, both personally and in their groups. But perhaps the most important thing to remember about David is his greatest work, and that is how to rock a bow tie at any social occasions. He's going to show you. So with that, let's welcome David Bruce.
Thank you, Peggy.
Sure, you said.
It's amazing what kind of an introduction $20 will buy you. So I should make one correction. Peggy mentioned my essays are posted on the website they were. I took them off recently because as we went through the editing process and did some revisions, prior to the book's publication, I thought it's best that we just leave it in the book format. So no longer on the website, but you can get them in the book, and you can ask for the case price or the pallet price. They might give you a discount. So before, writing a book is, I found out, at least towards the latter stages, very much a team process, a team effort. In the beginning, it's the author's idea, the author's writing. But when you get to the publication point, you really depend on a lot of Sharon. So it's only proper that I acknowledge those who helped me in this process. But starting with the first drafts, most of all, my lovely wife, Donna Wimberly, proofed every single page and offered many suggestions. And also along that line, Paula Finnegan, is Paula here? Somewhere. Paula May, anyway, Paula, there she is. They helped me in the initial drafts. And, other people can see things that maybe you don't see to give it a little better flow, a little better nuance, maybe a better choice of words. So I'm very grateful to their help. When we got to the publication part, I put everything into a big Word document, sent it over to Pat Gribler, and I thank Pat for her encouragement on this project. Also, another person in the production team, Nancy Grace, did wonderful work on the typography, the layout, and working on the front cover, finding the appropriate, we looked at a lot of different designs. But most of all, Sharon Dorr, my editor, stand up, Sharon. You may not know Sharon Dorr is a professional editor. She worked with Quest Books for many, many years, and I was very fortunate to work with her. I'm told that a lot of authors get really attached to their works, and I understand that. But I always took the attitude that Sharon is working with me as a partner, trying to make the book better. So I tried not to resist her suggestions, and I think we worked pretty well as a team. About the book is a book of theosophical writings. They're in the form of essays. There are 144 of them. And as Peggy just said, the greater portion of those essays are on the voice of the silence. There's 12 prologues. Well, originally they were written as prologues to the voice of the silence, but we changed those titles later. Those prologues are about the voice as a book, the structure, the history. Then the reflections part are my commentaries on specific verses in the voice. I really enjoyed that. It was a great challenge. The rest of the book, there's also 24, by the way, on the Secret Doctrine. Those are more based on the ideas from the Secret Doctrine. It's not a commentary so much. And then there's a number of essays on the spiritual life, some on meditation, and some on the contemporary scene. So a whole gamut. So I should say something about the essay form. The essay is a short literary form that is less systematic than, let's say, a dissertation or a treatise. And it treats topics from a limited scope, not superficial, but limited, and often a personal point of view. When I say limited scope, for instance, if you wanted to write an essay on freedom, freedom is such a big topic. You could talk about political freedom, religious freedom, economic freedom, psychological freedom. I mean, you could write books, volumes. But an essay being short, you would pick one limited aspect of the idea of freedom. So on many of these, I pick a certain idea, and I know I'm just addressing one aspect of it, not the whole thing. Now, the short form has been used in the arts to quite good effect, not only by writers, but by musicians. I'll just throw out a few examples. Felix Mendelssohn, German composer of the early 19th century, is known. He died very young, but he left a number of symphonies and so forth. But one of his most popular works are very short piano pieces called Songs Without Words. 66 little pieces, ranging anywhere from 52 seconds to no more than usually 3 minutes. They're lovely. They're lovely. And then another a Norwegian composer, Gustav Grieg, or rather Edvard Grieg, wrote lyric pieces, I think 66 pieces, short pieces. If you look at literature, everybody thinks of Thomas Melville as the author of Moby Dick. That's what we remember Melville for, right? But before he wrote that, he was very famous. He published in 1850 a series of short fictional stories, short stories. And that's where he got some of his best literary reviews. I love short stories. I love short pieces. I have the short stories of Hemingway and other authors at home. And they're very nice because people are busy today. And you can read them. If you just have a little free time, you can read a short story or you can listen to a few pieces of Mendelssohn. But a symphony or a novel takes a lot of time. And people also have, let's be honest, people have shorter attention spans these days. So when I picked the form of essays for this, it was for those reasons. I didn't want to write a big book that somebody would buy and say, well, someday I'll get to read it. Well, someday it'll probably never come. But I figured if I wrote short pieces, people can read them on a plane or, when they have the time. And being short, they can also be used, many of them, I think, for study groups, for discussion. Most of mine are under 400 words. I should give you a little historical perspective on the essay. In the Western world, the first writer that's generally given credit for, quote unquote, inventing the essay is Michel de Montaigne, the French philosopher who is quoted by Blavatsky in the end of the introduction to the Secret Doctrine. Remember the bouquet of flowers? And so that's a quote by Montaigne. His essays, I've read many of them. They're long, they're kind of rambling, they're discursive. He has personal anecdotes. Very interesting, though. He was born in the early 16th century. About a generation later, an English person, Francis Bacon, was born. I think Bacon certainly read the essays of Montaigne because they use some of the same titles. Now, his essays are much shorter, 1,000 words or less. They're very terse, very short, almost aphoristic, almost like Patanjali, almost that way. I love his essays. And then you have somebody like, and there's many, many examples, one more, Ralph Waldo Emerson, transcendentalist philosopher of the late 19th century. And his essays are very Eastern, very metaphysical, very deep. He wrote one basically on karma, but he called it compensation. It's 7,700 words. That's a long essay. Mine, again, are 400, they're designed for the modern audience. So one writer who I like, I have his book, Aldous Huxley, The Perennial Philosophy. I'm sure some of you have read. Yes, Garrett has. I love his writing, but you know what? Aldous Huxley, he was not a fan of the essay. And he said, and I quote, an essay is a literary device in which somebody can say everything about anything. End of quote. I like his book, but I disagree with that. Yeah, that could be the case. But my essays are not about everything. They're about theosophical ideas. And I certainly am not presumptuous to say I could say everything there is to say about it. I mean, you can say you can never say the last word about any theosophical idea. So my essays are personal in this sense. That was part of the definition of an essay. It's short, treats a subject from a specific or limited point of view, but it also can be personal. So mine are personal in this sense. Now, I do try to avoid the personal pronoun I. I really hate the idea of me writing and say I, this, I, that's so out there. And I like to keep myself in the background. But yet, I do come through in more subtle ways. And first of all, by the choice of topics. If the topic doesn't interest me, how am I going to write about it in an interesting way? I don't think I can interest other people if I'm not interested. So that's the first step. I write about things that interest me, and I try to do it in a very elegant, defined manner. Secondly, I do throw in some personal anecdotes, but very few. There are a few where it serves to illustrate a point I'm trying to make. But I try to keep personal anecdotes down to a minimum. But mostly, it's by the citations that I've used. And God, Sharon, there were a lot of citations, weren't there? And I was to the point of pulling my hair out when I got to that point, and Sharon knows. The thing is, when I wrote these, I never intended to publish them. That was the furthest thing from my mind. And it was only Michelle Sender suggested it, and Maria probably forgot. She also mentioned, have you ever thought of... So between Michelle and Maria, that got me off the dime, so to speak, and I thought, yeah, maybe I should. So not thinking I was going to publish, I never kept source of all the citations, where they came from. There's extensive, well, we don't use footnotes here, we use endnotes. But, the publication, where the quote came from, the date of publication, the publisher, I could find a lot of them, Secret Doctrine, Key to Theosophy, Annie Besant, Leibniz, because those books are all in the library, right? And I have them at home, I have them in my office. That wasn't too hard. But it was the other ones by authors you might expect to see quoted in a theosophical work, like Cicero, Seneca, Aristotle, John Stuart Mill. Who else? I mean, there were so many. Emerson, T.S. Eliot. Where did I find all these? And so that was back in January, December. It was kind of panic time for me. And I went through a lot of work there trying to track down. I think I got most of them. And we actually took out one or two because I couldn't find a source. Why do I mention all that? Not just to impress you that David Bruce reads a lot of books. Well, I always have. I'm a bookaholic. But here's the idea why I did that. I purposely, yes, I quoted Peruker, I quoted Leadbeater, I quoted Barborka, and of course Blavatsky. You expect that, right, in a theosophical book? But my way of thinking is that if you can support and corroborate theosophical ideas with quotations from other sources out in the public culture, from literature, poetry, even films, it helps to validate the theosophical ideas. Because you're saying, here's the theosophical idea. You're not saying this blatantly, but here's somebody that lived 600 years ago saying pretty much the same thing. So that's why I peppered the essays with lots of quotes from very different sources. So it accomplishes that purpose, and also it reflects who I am. These are books that I have read over the years. I don't expect you to read them. However, some of them may be leads that you might want to follow up on. Whenever I listened to Joy Mills or John Algeo and I heard them mention another book that I hadn't heard of, I'm here like where you are, and I would write the title down, and I would say, I got to follow up on that. I bought many books like that based on talks by Ed Abdill or Robert Elwood. Oh, I'd never heard of that book. Check it out, buy it, read it, So that's that. There's not much else to say. I enjoyed writing this. It was a challenge, but it was enjoyable. I did learn one thing. It's more difficult, I think, to write a short piece like this within the constraints of 350 or 400 words than the longer. I've written articles published in the Quest and the American Theosophist, but when you're free to ramble on and be kind of loose with your words, writing a longer article is not that hard. But when you say, I'm going to confine myself just to so many words maximum, one page, it's really hard to eliminate all the superfluous words and the distractions and really get to the point. And it helped me to focus, and there were a lot of, when I was writing these, there were a lot of things I would have loved to say, but within the constraints. And you can read the introduction to find out why I chose that limit. The introduction will tell you why. But I found that a very good discipline as a writer, to just get down to the bare bones. And I appreciate good prose. So I try to come up with prose that was enjoyable, elegant. I think that's important. I don't like sloppy language. It's important, especially when you're talking about sublime things. You should not be careless with the words or your syntax. You're talking about spiritual things, sacred things. You should be very careful with your language. And I respect the language. It should be handled with care. One last thing, I talked about Mendelssohn's short pieces and the Grieg short pieces. In the music, if you ever listen to something like, Michael was smiling, I think you might have heard those pieces. You're nodding your head, yeah, he's a musician. In a short piece like that, 2 or 3 minutes, you can vary the mood drastically from one to another. But if you're writing a symphony, the mood you can't just sustain one mood for a 45-minute piece. But in these essays, you can stay with one mood. The tone of it will vary. Some of mine are quite serious, others are analytical, some are even whimsical, others are speculative, and quite a few of them, or at least they have statements that I hope are provocative, and I did that with the idea that study groups might be, that would be a catalyst for study groups, the provocative sentences for discussion, because I've been in study groups, I know how it is. So anyway, I hope you are able to purchase the book. I hope you enjoy it. If you do read it, I'd like to hear from you. Your feedback, I would appreciate that. And any questions? Otherwise, Pablo.
I want to add to your short
One
list
second.
of writers who use short essays. And that is Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges. And his essays don't exceed 5 pages. And he wrote about Shakespeare, Cervantes, Chesterton, Stevenson, Spinoza, Swedenborg.
Yes, yes.
In 5 pages and less.
Sure. The essay as a literary form is very fluid. It's not like if you're into music, a sonata has a certain form, a symphony has a certain number of movements, a concerto, But when you get into essays, you can play with that. It can be shorter, It's very. It allows the writer a lot of freedom. But basically it's short. Usually talks about one thing, maybe 2 things. And the writer, like Montaigne, injected a lot of, when I was at the tavern, little personal things like that. I try to avoid the personal stuff as much as I can, because I remember reading Jeffrey Hodson advice on how to give a lecture. Don't talk about yourself. Now, that doesn't go over so well today, because people like to hear about personal experiences of the speaker, but I've always liked that advice. Get yourself out of it, talk about theosophy or whatever it is you're doing. If you're giving a talk on mathematics, people want to hear about mathematics. They want to hear about what you did last Sunday. I took the dog for a walk.
David,
Yes, sir.
as you were going through the exercise of putting that book together, was there one thought or one principle or one truism that you wanted to get across?
Thank you, David. I think there was, although maybe it wasn't conscious, perhaps in the background of my mind. And I think that's reflected in the title of the book, Serving a Higher Purpose. I think this was all aimed at being serious about life, even though some of them are whimsical. And, there's nothing wrong with being entertaining. But the overall arch of it is that there's a deep purpose to life that these wisdom teachings have. And I think that's it. That was, more or less.
David, were you able to draw on any of the writings you did in the introductory letters to the National Lodge papers?
The short answer is no. 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 I didn't want to plagiarize myself.
Hi, Dave. Could you briefly compare and contrast the short story fiction form with the essay form?
Well, they're in a way, the short story is a narrative. it's a narrative, follows the story. The type of essays are not telling a story so much. They're a writer's idea. But one thing that there is, that at least in my essays, that is in common with a short story, I can't think of the English writer's name, but I have a book of essays by this guy, and they all end with a little twist at the end. It's so clever. A little twist, unexpected, and it's in the last one or two sentences. And so I tried to do that with some of these, because I think it kind of, you lead the reader this way, and all of a sudden, bam, you hit them here. And it just keep them on their toes. Now, I know there's another question people are dying to ask, and they just don't want to ask it. Did I wear a bow tie just for this event? You can ask any staff person here. I've been seen on the premises wearing bow ties before. So I take my clothing seriously, my music, and my literature seriously. Oh, and my wife. Sorry, dear. Okay. Very good. Well, thank you for...
Which one? The last one. Yes.
Check